Your job as a forwarder operator is to extract timber safely, avoiding damage to the machine and to nature. Thanks to modern machines, this is usually fairly straightforward, but sometimes both you and your machine will be put to the test. So make sure that both you and your machine always get off to a good start. Check the radiator, the engine oil, the hydraulic fluid, the battery, and the tires. And do you have the traction aids you're likely to need? Start the machine and run the engine at fast idle speed for a couple of minutes before driving off. Check the oil pressure, the fuel, charging system, and compressed air. Now, your own comfort. Adjust your seat to the best position. Make sure you can reach the pedals conveniently. Set the springs to suit your weight. Adjust the controls and armrests so that your arms are properly supported. To warm up the hydraulics, run carefully the different functions. Forwarders have one of two types of transmission, hydrostatic or hydrodynamic. Hydrostatic systems have much better engine braking, so you'll have to use the foot brake more if your machine is hydrodynamic. When you're working in rough terrain, the stresses acting on you and your machine will be much greater if you drive too fast. Always adjust your speed to the conditions. Before driving over a difficult stretch for the first time, check the ground on foot. Always avoid driving blindly, risking getting stuck and breaking the machine. So, how should you cope with different obstacles? The best way, of course, is to choose a route that bypasses them. When this isn't possible, provided you're sure that the machine has sufficient clearance, you can straddle them. Often you won't be able to avoid running over obstacles with the wheels or tracks. First, reduce speed so that the machine rides over them smoothly, avoiding excessive bumps or swaying. Steer so that the wheel rides over at the lowest possible point. Use the brakes to stop wheels bumping back down violently. When just one side of the machine rides up over obstacles, the machine will obviously tilt over to the other side. You have to learn how heavy a list the machine can cope with under different conditions before it's likely to tip up. More about this later. When tight on space, such as in a thinning stand, it's often best to try to negotiate obstacles of about the same height on both sides of the machine at once. This prevents the machine listing over heavily, which is both a hazard to safety and to the trees. Some machines have automatic leveling systems you can use. Hollows or depressions are also common. Always try to keep offside and near side wheels at about the same height. So if the length of the hollow is greater than the track of the machine, drive across the depression, not along it. The same applies to ditches and streams, although here there's often the added danger of getting stuck. If so, cross them diagonally, one wheel at a time, but never risk the machine capsizing. If you need to cross at the same point several times, fill the ditch with logs. Crossing will be easier, and you'll do less damage to the banks. Remember to take the logs with you on the last trip. Slopes are something else you'll have to learn to cope with. The basic rule is simple. Whenever possible, drive straight up or down a slope. Before starting to climb a slope, always select the right gear first, so that you won't have to change again before reaching the top. If the slope is especially difficult, also engage the differential lock, but only for driving straight up or down. Make sure you know how to operate the transmission by reading the instructions in the operator's manual. If the wheels start to spin, you can help by gently zigzagging or weaving up the slope. If despite this you still end up stuck with the wheels spinning, you'll have to reverse back down again. First, apply the brakes. If your machine is hydrostatic, reverse using engine braking. If it's hydrodynamic, select a forward gear and use the throttle. Steer the machine back down in the same tracks, but take care not to end up at an angle to the slope. But let's return to the more usual case, where you make it to the top. If you need to turn, wait until you can do so safely, where the ground is fairly level. If the slope is a long one, it may be better to reverse up it to get to the timber. The rules for downhill slopes are much the same. Drive straight down the slope, selecting the same gear you would for climbing up it. On steep slopes, this will usually be first gear. Engine braking will keep the speed down, helping you to maintain steering control and balance. If the hill is so steep that the engine revs start to increase, use the foot brake to control the speed. You must drive dead slow if the ground is rough or if the route is not straight. As a temporary measure, a log held in the grapple can be used as a counterweight. Drive slowly so that you can adjust the height of the boom as you go. As you already know, wherever possible you should avoid driving across rather than along slopes because of the risk of capsizing. Always drive slower than on the flat and with a reduced load. Some machines have swing axles, which compensate for the incline, making them more sure-footed than other machines. But even these machines have their limits. Your job is to know where the limits are and to keep well inside them. Always use your seatbelt. It helps you maintain a comfortable position as well as providing protection if the machine should roll over. If the machine should go, hang on. Inside the cab, you're safe. You're going to encounter marshy ground fairly frequently in the woods. It's best if you avoid driving over it altogether. The machine has to overcome greater resistance as the wheels sink in, so it uses more fuel and there's more wear and tear. But more to the point, the machine cuts deep, ugly ruts in the ground, often seriously damaging tree roots. Areas of marshy ground are often set aside for conservation. You have to take care not to crash through these sections with your machine. But often you can't avoid driving over wetland. To reduce surface pressure, you can fit tracks or wide tires. As a temporary measure, you can even reduce the tire pressure. Always try to assess the bearing strength of the ground ahead. If you're unsure, investigate on foot. You can get a good idea of how soft the ground is from how far your feet sink in. Keep an eye out for stones, stumps, and roots that can make the going firmer. If the ground is very soft, use a stick or pole to find the solid ground underneath. If the ground is simply too soft, you must either choose another route or reinforce the ground with slash or logs. When driving on marshy ground, try to steer a straight course. Wheels and tracks cut deep ruts in the surface when the machine is turning. Another way to help preserve the surface is to take a different route on each pass. Or you can see that one of your wheels is in the middle of previous tracks, assuming there's sufficient room, of course. If the ground is soft, you'll usually be forced to carry a reduced load. Unless you're on the edge of the forest track, you'll be able to load up with more once you're back on solid ground. Sooner or later, even the best operators get stuck. Once this happens, don't let the wheels spin and dig themselves in deeper. Climb down and assess the situation. Reduce the weight by unloading some of the timber. Then try reversing out. If this doesn't work, unload the remaining timber. Sometimes inserting some logs under the wheels or tracks will provide enough grip for the machine to pull itself out. If all else fails, the machine will have to be winched out. No matter how fast the machine is stuck, a winch, something solid to anchor it to, and a strong enough cable will always get you out. If you decide to tow the machine up without a winch, make sure the other machine is on good firm ground so that you don't end up with two machines stuck in the mud. Make sure you use a cable or chain that's both strong enough and long enough. The best time to operate on marshy ground is in the winter when the soil is frozen. Frozen ground with a thin cover of snow makes ideal conditions for forwarding. The frost provides a firm base and the snow smooths out a lot of the bumps. Deep snow can make the going difficult. Sometimes you'll have to zigzag to make headway. Loose snow can prevent the frost from penetrating the ground. So sometimes you may have to drive an unladen machine over some areas first to compact the snow. After a day or two, the ground will have frozen solid and you'll be able to start extracting the timber. Snow can also conceal obstacles, so take great care when negotiating potentially dangerous slopes for the first time. Traction is obviously different on snow and ice. Make sure you have suitable tracks or chains on your machine. All off-road driving has its problems, but by planning the work, we can minimize them. Planning must be done by someone who knows the machine's capabilities well. So, who better than you, the machine operator? You'll also be acquiring the knowledge of the area that you'll need to have in any case. The first thing you have to decide is whether the terrain and extraction roads are naturally solid enough, or if operations must wait until the ground is frozen. This decision often determines where the strip roads will run. The next step is to identify and mark out areas such as wetland and impassable rocky outcrops that should be set aside as conservation areas. Choose the best extraction routes and plan the strip roads. Avoid routes that would mean you'd have to drive across slopes or operate with a reduced payload, especially near the end of the road network. Plan how the timber is to be arranged at the landing, both for efficient unloading of the forwarder and for efficient loading of the haulage vehicles. For instance, place the largest assortment nearest to the logging site to keep the forwarder runs as short as possible. So there's a lot that you and your machine will have to face. But you'll do fine if you get to know your machine and look after it, and if you learn to spot obstacles in the terrain and know your machine's capabilities. If you plan your work and think first, using brain rather than muscle. If you strive for quality in your work, you should be able to look back on where you've been with pride. And last but not least, if you look after yourself and vary your work. Adjust your seat, use your seatbelt, and now and then leave the machine to stretch your legs.